Good morning, church. So great to be here with you this morning. Looking forward to all that God's going to do. Faith is hearing the voice of God and trusting the heart of God enough to act on what you've heard. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11 this morning, beginning in verse 23 through 27. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Hebrews chapter 11. If you need a Bible, go ahead and slip your hand up. We'd love to place a Bible in your hand. If you don't have one at home, we'd love for you to keep that Bible as our gift to you. We are a people of the Word here. So as you turn to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 through 27, before we get there, just a quick picture. I love what I get to do for a living. Get a chance to be a pastor of this amazing church, work along people like John and Aaron and David and Cameron, so many, Denise, so many great leaders here. But I also get a chance to travel and speak and to consult and coach. And for many years of my life, I loved traveling and speaking. And really, there was one week of the year that I loved doing almost more than any other week. It was a week of what they called kids camp. And I love going to speak at kids camp because when kids go to camp, they think they're going to Disney World. They think it's the best place on earth. They're just happy to get away from mom and dad. They're not playing the cool game. They are just happy to be at camp. And by the way, I think greatest theological exercise I do every year, speak to kids. I just tell you that right now. And if you're someone who wants to learn to speak, speaking to kids is the place to learn to speak, to do that. And so I used to love doing that, and I love being at kids camp. And at the kids camp, I'd love to tell you that every kid is there for the worship and teaching. They're not. They're there for one little thing. It's called the swimming pool. Because the swimming pool is the place where heroes and legends are made. The swimming pool is a place where dreams are won and lost. And every day at free time, it's like ants on a sugar mound as kids just descend upon the swimming pool. Swimming pool for about 100 people has like 1,000 kids at it. And at the swimming pool, there is one place, at least before we got safety conscious in all of our world, there was one place that's above every other place. It's a little thing called the diving board. I'm not talking about the low dive, I'm talking about the high dive. This is the place where kids are risking their lives for legendary status. If you've ever been to the pool at kids camp and seen the diving board, it is like a Disney World line without a fast pass to jump off the diving board. Literally, you're going to spend your whole free time waiting for one jump. That's going to be your whole free time. And in this moment, as the kids line up to jump off the board, what I've noticed is at kids camp, you've got really one of three options. Your first option is to be what I call big splash guy. And if you're carrying a couple extra pounds or little big bones, this is a great option for you. When you go off, you do a can opener or a cannonball, you do a preacher seat, and the water goes up, and everyone just goes, woo! I'm not a huge guy, but at kids camp, I'm enormous, So I love being big splash guy, going up, doing a preacher seat or a can opener, and the splash goes up, and the kids are like, whoa, and little kids are surfing on my waves in the shallow end, you know what I'm talking about? But if you're not big splash guy, there's a second option. You can be what I call great dive guy. This is the kid who's been training all year for this moment. They now have a captive audience. They've been taking dive lessons, and usually they're a little bit of a skinnier kid, but they're going to go off frontwards and go back and do a back dive, or go off backwards, do a front dive, or do a 1.5. And when they hit the water, there is no splash at all. And when they hit the water, everyone just goes, whoa, wow. People are holding up tins in the shallow end, It's amazing. But if you're not the big splash guy, and you're not the great dive guy, there is a third option for you at the swimming pool. You can be what I call belly flop guy. Now, most people at the swimming pool are not trying to be belly flop guy. There is a crazy every once in a while that's trying to do that. Most people think they're guy number 2. They think they're great dive guy, and before you know it, they go up there to do a 1.5 or some kind of thing, and they over-rotate or under-rotate, and it's almost in that moment like the whole pool knows what's about to happen because everyone's neck just turns at the same time, and you see that body hit the water and it's like in unison, everyone just goes, ah. Little kids coming up in the dead man's float, saying, I'm going to be in the shallow end for the rest of free time. I'll be down there. Now, it's one thing for a kid to smack, but when an adult smacks, it's a very different issue. The word concussion is not too far away. And I remember several years ago being in the swimming pool with my buddy Norris, my buddy Neely. We began to do the kinds of things that guys do in moments like this. We began to dare each other to try things that we weren't sure we could do. Because ladies, just gotta tell you, it doesn't matter how old a guy gets, he never gets past junior high. Just wanna let you know that. Because what a guy wants to see is another guy in pain so he can laugh at him. It's just the way that we're built. And so me and my buddy Norris, my buddy Neely on the diving board, we're having this kind of conversation where we were daring each other to try a 1.5. And so, one of us said, I'll do it, but if I do it, you got to do it. They're saying, yeah, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm only going to do it if you do it. Well, I'm going to do it, but if I do it, even if I die, you got to do it. And our wives are in the shallow end saying, please don't do it. Please don't do it. You're getting older. This could be not good for you. This is not going to be helpful. But we're guys and we think we know better. So it's me, my buddy Norris, my buddy Neely. I won't tell you what order we went in. First guy's on the board saying, I'm going to do it. But if I do it, you got to do it. I'm going to do it. And so he's on the board and he goes up and he jumps and he does the 1.5. And when he does, he nails it. First guy nails it. Now, all this means is that the other 2 guys got to do it. Guy number 2 is on the board. He's not the most gracious, and he goes and he jumps, and he gets all the way around and about a quarter of the way around, and his body hits the water in a way that no human body should hit the water. I'm talking about welts on the chest, blown eye sockets, blood in the water. Sharks are circling. That's how bad it is. And then there's guy number 3. He's seen one guy nail it and one guy smack. He's on the board, and he gets right to jump up. He's like, let me just think about that a little bit more, and let me I just need to stretch out a little bit. And this time he goes, and he jumps, but instead of doing the 1.5, he just does, pencil. Now his wife's calling him a chicken from the shallow end, and so he's getting back up on the board, and he wants to flip, and he wants to dive so bad, but he's just stuck at the edge of the board. I want to ask you this question. When's the last time you felt that way with God? You sense that he was calling you to flip and dive, to dare to dream, dare to imagine, but you're so afraid of smacking. You're just stuck, or you jump, and instead of doing 1.5, you just do pencil. Can I just share with you this morning that the reason I bring that up is I think in Christianity today, we have glorified pencils. Where we begin to think that being a Christian is just about not messing up. It's just about what we say no to. But I just tell you this morning that Christianity is not a big no sign. Christianity is a big yes sign. Yes, there are some things that we say no to, but we say no to those things to say something bigger, to say a bigger yes with our lives. And too many times when Christianity gets contained to pencils, we forget that there's a God of the universe, a God who is speaking to us, a God who is daring us to dream, dare to imagine, because faith is hearing the voice of God and trusting the heart of God. It's like John's been teaching us. In hearing the voice of God, we hear the promises of God. In trusting the heart of God, we lean on the presence of God. So as we hear the voice of God and trust the heart of God, we meet God midair. That's what faith is. Faith isn't on this side of the Faith is in the air. I want to chat about that this morning because this is the story of the heroes of faith that we've been reading about in Hebrews chapter 11. They didn't do pencils. They dared to flip and to dive. And today we get to one of the primary leaders of faith in the Old Testament, a guy named Moses. Literally, in Jewish theology, the Exodus holds the same place of Jesus for New Testament readers. And Moses is the primary architect or leader of this moment for Israel's history. As you might remember already in the book of Hebrews, we've learned that the people that the writer of Hebrews is writing to are in the middle of a crisis. They are Jews by birth, or Hebrews, that's the name of the book, but they're people who are having Jesus experiences. So they've had Jesus experiences, and the question for them is how do we live in light of that? Because imminent persecution for following Christ is on the horizon. And their tendency is to just go back to their life before they met Jesus, to just go back to being Jews, to just kind of do the Judaism thing because it's an accepted religion of their day. And the writer of Hebrews says, no, you can't do that. Jesus is greater than anyone who's come before him. He's the great high priest. He's greater than all the angels. He's the great prophet. He's greater than everyone. Jesus is the trump card, the ace of spades. And so in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 10, the writer calls them to the cross. But in Hebrews chapter 11, he releases stories of faith for inspiring their own lives in the middle of their own crises. And I love the way that John and Aaron have both talked about this because we've been really honest about these heroes of faith, that these are not people who don't have doubts. These are not people who don't make mistakes. At best, these are mixed bags. They're people like you and I who have good days and bad days. But here in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 23, we get Moses' story. And in his story, we might find some echoes for our own this morning. Verse 23, here's what the scripture says. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw the child was beautiful. Now, just a little caveat, every parent thinks their kid's beautiful. It's not always the case, but we act as if they are, right? This is a little different. They're saying we're setting him aside because they see something distinct in him. And they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused. That's a strong word there. He made a significant choice. He refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Here's his rationale. He considered reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. If I could narrow Moses' life down to one big thought that I think his life is sharing with us this morning, here it is. Life is a choice. Life is a choice. That we become who we choose to be. That the greatest determiner of our lives tomorrow is the choices that you and I make today. Now, I know if you're like me, that's not the way we like to think about things. We like to think that we're a product of circumstance or that we are at best our gifts, talents, and abilities. And as important as all those things are, as important as it is to look at the systemic realities of the circumstances that are created in our lives, the truth of Scripture says in the midst of any circumstance, in the midst of any talent, gift, or ability, what more determines our life than anything else is the choices that we make. Let me say it this way. The greatest spiritual activity that you will participate in or do this week is not your devotions, it's your decisions. Because it's our decisions that reveal our devotion. And what Moses is telling us is that our life is filled with choices. And the thing that we don't like to think about a lot of times, we love making choices, but what we don't realize every day is that not only do we make choices, our choices end up making us. We become who we choose to be. So here's the question. What does faith look like at the level of our life choices? See, in Moses' life, there was a choice that was pretty clear. There was a choice between Egypt and Israel. There was a choice between provision and prosperity and prominence, and there was a choice of struggle. And the writer of Hebrews, as he looks at Moses' life, says Moses' life was defined by this choice. He chose not to just embrace Egypt, but dare to embrace the story, the narrative of Israel that Aaron preached to us last week. He engaged the struggle. And that his choice, that significant choice, not just chosen once, but chosen every day, defined his life. And the Bible is very clear. This isn't just a one-time pattern in Scripture. It's an over and over pattern that the Bible says we too find ourselves at a crossroads. There's the road that leads to life and a road that leads to death. And that you and I are not just defined by our future. It's not just about whether you're going to heaven or hell. It's about the heaven or hell you're creating here on earth. That every day we are stuck between life and death, and you and I have to make a choice. And that would be easy if the road to life would always look like life, and the road to death always looked like death. See, I don't know a whole lot of people who are going around saying, I'd like to die today. I'd like to choose destruction. Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to destroy someone's life. Most of us aren't thinking that way. But here's the primary problem. It's that the road to life often at first looks like death, and the road to death often at first looks like life. See, no one chooses death until they dress it up as life. No one chooses evil until they dress it up as good. And if you and I aren't careful in our lives in regard to our decisions, we'll choose death thinking that we're choosing life and miss out on life because it often looks like death. So here's the question. Who are you choosing to be? Who are we choosing to be? What keeps us? What keeps us from choosing life? And what does a life of faith look like at the level of our life choices? Well, here in this compelling paragraph, we get several things that Moses was tempted to settle for. And yet, we see the distinction of his life as he chose faith in the middle of that. It's the kind of message that speaks to us right where we live, work, and play. Because these things are in the water at our workplace. They're in the water in our home. They're in the water of our lives. That you and I need to overhear Moses' life so that we can make sense of ours. There's 4 things that Moses tempted to settle for, but in the end choose faith. 4 things that you and I are tempted to settle for in all of our decisions that keep us from the life of faith. The first one is this. Moses was tempted to settle for the temporary. Did you catch that here? He chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. That Moses was tempted with the fleeting pleasures, that which is temporary, the lure of instant gratification. The lure to be captivated by what we can see, what we can touch, what we can handle. I love the way that Richard Foster, who wrote the groundbreaking book, Celebration of Discipline, talks about this. Before you get to any of his book, here's the first quote of his book. He says, "Superficiality is the curse of our age. The doctrine of instant satisfaction is a primary spiritual problem. The desperate need today is not for a greater number of intelligent people or gifted people, but for deep people." This temptation that if you and I aren't careful, we'll settle for the success that we can have now versus the significance that God's calling us to later. This tendency to settle for what we think as good now versus the greater or the more that God has for us in the future. Then Moses was here in Egypt and he was tempted to just settle for the treasures of Egypt. And wherever you work at today, this is our temptation, right? I mean, I love watching college football. I watched college football yesterday. I have no idea how Ohio State escaped last night. I'm kind of mourning that a little bit. I know we got some Ohio State fans here, but in college football, you know, if you get hired to a big name program and you haven't won the national championship in 3 years, you're on the hot seat. If you get hired as a CEO today, if you haven't increased market share in 3 years, you're on the hot seat. If you're a salesman or saleswoman here, or you're a manager and you haven't increased your productivity by 20%, all of a sudden you're on the hot seat. And if you and I aren't careful in the middle of that kind of pressure, we will sell out for what is immediate. We will sell out for immediate success, and we will sacrifice the future of our lives on the back end of it. How many more American businesses do we have to see go through this defrauding process where everything's propped up for instant gratification till we realize there's something deeply wrong with our choices? And this is my issue. This is my issue. If I'm not careful, I will settle for the superficial and the temporary. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to be in the room with Dayton Moore. Dayton Moore is the GM. By the way, when I say be in a room, I meant I was in a room and he was speaking, and I was in a big room of people. So he didn't know I was there, but I knew he was there. But he was the GM for the Kansas City Royals a couple years ago when they won the World Series. And I'll never forget him telling the story of going into Kansas City. He says, if you hire me as your GM, here's what you need to know. It will take us 7 to 8 years to win the World Series. And in the first 2 years, we will probably be the worst team in Major League Baseball. And they were. First 2 years, everyone wanted him removed from the GM position because he was doing a big fix for the program, not just simply trying to win one World Series. He was going back into the farm league system and fixing things in the farm league system. He was fixing things in their draft. And he said, for the first 2 years, I know that we're on an 8-year plan, but for the first 2 years, it looks like we're losing, and we're losing bigger than before I got there. But he said, I'm here to build a whole system, not to just have a little bit of success. And I think this is true about mine and your lives, that the things that God's calling us to can't be built in a year or two. They can't function in a microwave. But if you and I aren't careful, we will trade the eternal for the temporary. And so here's what Moses calls us to in his life of faith. He says, choose significance over success. Choose the long term over the short term. Dare to give your life for something beyond your life. In Moses' life, we don't think about this a lot of times. He spent 40 years in the desert before he became the guy who could deliver people out of Israel. That should be good news to some of us that are in the second half of our life. The best stuff's ahead, guys. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before he became the guy. Can I just tell you, let me just speak very plainly. There are no overnight successes. There are things that look like overnight successes, but every overnight success is usually 20 years in the making. And God says, here's the deal. I want you to live for something that's bigger than your life. I don't want you to get caught up in the temporary. Number 2 is this. Moses was tempted to settle for what is easy. Did you see the word there? He chose to be the mistreatment with the people of God. In other words, the way that Moses moved was not the easy way, it was the hard way. Have you ever noticed that everything that is bad for you is cheap and easy? I mean, literally, I'm not joking. I was in the Checkers drive-thru a couple months ago. That says a lot about my life at that point in my life. I love Checkers. I do. Guys, I mean, never mind. That's a whole different world. But I'm in the Checkers drive-thru, and on the sign, and the lady asked me, she said, you can add cheese, bacon, and ranch to your fries for $1. Cheese, bacon, and ranch. I'm not really sure what the profit margin is on that, but I'm sitting there thinking, of course, for $1, anything that's bad for us is often cheap and easy. You know what's hard? Eating good. Never once have I been to a restaurant where they said, you know what? You could add broccoli, green beans, and carrots for $1. The things that are good for us are often hard, and the things that are bad for us are often easy. And if you and I aren't careful, we will choose what is bad for us instead of what is good for us because of our value for what is easy and our misvalue for things that are difficult. See, we have to remember ourselves as people of faith that we cannot disconnect a theology of resurrection from a theology of the cross. In other words, it's the breakdown that often gives us the breakthrough. See, the temptation of most of our lives is we want abundance without obedience. We want significance without struggle. We want celebration without sacrifice. We want pleasure without the opportunity of pain. We want the glory without the groan. And God is coming to us and saying, you want to be a person of faith. You want to be a person whose decisions are marked by faith. You can't take the easy way out of everything, that there is a road that leads to life that at first looks like death. And many times on that road, it won't be easy. It will be difficult. Here was Moses' journey. Not only did he spend 40 years in the desert, when God called him, he said, I'm going to call you to take a people and lead them into the wilderness. He just got out of the wilderness. And God's asked him to go back into the wilderness. And for 40 years, he's leading this. Can I tell you, those of you that are leaders in the room, every leadership journey that you will do with a group of people is leading them out of Egypt and into the promised land. And you want to know what the most difficult part of that leadership journey is? When you get them out of Egypt and into the wilderness, and they look at you and say, it's better in Egypt. You want to know why it's difficult? Because in that moment, they're right. Egypt is better than the wilderness. It's just not as good as the promised land. And it's in the wilderness that we become the kinds of people who can handle the promised land in our lives. That's why at this church, I just want to tell you, we've made a commitment to not just simply do what is easy. We're not functioning underneath a customer service mentality. See, I was a coach long before I was a minister, and I know how to coach athletes. I know how to coach people that want to move forward in their lives. And what I didn't do as a coach is just say, what do you guys want to do? What I didn't do as a coach is just simply, say, oh, someone's complaining. We got a customer service issue. No, I mean, if people are complaining as a soccer coach, that makes me feel like I'm doing my job a little bit. Again, it's not, being a jerk or anything like that, but I have a trainer in my life. His name's Alan. He trains me physically. I know it doesn't look like it all the time. It's because I spend too much time in that Checkers drive-thru, all right? So we're working on that. But Alan's my physical trainer, and I pay Alan to push me to places that I won't push myself. Because I know what I'll do. I'll take it easy on myself. I need someone to push me. Here's what Tom Landry said great coaching is. Tom Landry, great football coach for the Dallas Cowboys, said this: coaching is getting grown men or women to do what they don't want to do so they can become who they've always wanted to be. This is the posture that God takes in our life. He's not a customer service agent that's just saying, hey, I know you're in trouble a little bit, just kind of make your complaints out and I'll fix them at the door. No, he's saying, no, here's the deal. I'm trying to make you into someone. And there's no breakthrough in the drive-through. So I've got to bring you into the wilderness, and in the wilderness, I will make you who you've always wanted to be. Amen. Guys, that's why we have processes like listening prayer or unique or all these kinds of things. We're not trying to make anyone miserable. Here's what we know. We got to get you close to failure. You've got to be able to flirt with failure. I was working out with my trainer, Alan, and not too long ago, and we were doing a burnout set where we were, I was bench pressing, and there was weight on it, and then there was less weight, and there was less weight, and finally, I'm just benching the bar. And it's embarrassing. I mean, I'm looking around, I'm trying to, I can barely get the bar off my chest anymore. And finally, we're done, and Alan looks at me as a trainer, and he says, Dave, that's as close as I'm ever going to let you get to failure. Can I just tell you, I need someone to help me flirt with failure. I need someone to take me through the wilderness to get me to the promised land, because in my life decisions, in my family, as a parent, in my home, I'm tempted every day to take the easy way out. And Moses' life speaks to us. It says, choose perseverance over self-preservation. Can I just tell you how many businesses I've seen ruined by a boss who chose self-preservation over perseverance? How many teams I've seen ruined over someone who chooses self-preservation over perseverance? See, when you're in the wilderness, the tendency is to just kind of grab onto your own stuff and not die. But faith chooses a different way. It says we believe at the end of every death, there's a resurrection. At the end of the death of a dream, there's the rebirth of a dream. At the end of the death of a vision, there's the rebirth of a vision. So we don't have to fear death. We don't have to self-preserve, because even if we experience failure, it's just a greater opportunity for faith. Settle for what is temporary. Settle for what is easy. Third temptation is to settle for the imitation. It's to settle for the generic versus the genuine. Did you get Moses' value statement here? Here's his value statement. He's not a masochist, by the way. He's not just looking for ways to punish himself or be hard on himself. But here's his value statement, verse 28. He considered the reproach of Christ as greater wealth, or in some translations, greater value than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to his reward. In other words, for Moses, this wasn't just masochism of trying to find the hard way and try and find the long way. For him, he was saying, I've made a value judgment. I've tasted the genuine thing, and so no longer am I going to be content with the imitation. I won't take the generic anymore. He understands that even though many of us want God to give us the short road to nowhere, God's inviting us on the long road to somewhere. And the long road to somewhere really is somewhere. And when you've been to that place, you don't want to go to nowhere anymore, so you're willing to go through a little pain to get there. Let's think about how to demonstrate this to you. Those of you that have been at camp, maybe you have seen me do this before. But I remember when my mom and dad, when I was young, and they would go to like a Financial Peace University conference. It wasn't Financial Peace, it was Larry Burkett back when I was growing up. And so when they would come home for something like that, by the way, we do Financial Peace here. I recommend, if you haven't done that, you need to do that. It's a little bit of pain, but it'll be worth it in the long run. But I remember them coming home from places like that when all of a sudden weird things started showing up in our pantry and in our refrigerator, you know. When they left, it was, Dr. Pepper. But when they came home, all of a sudden, Dr. Thunder started showing up at our place. When they left, in our pantry, we had Rice Krispies, but when they came back, all of a sudden, we have crispy rice. And instead of Fruit Loops, we would have Fruit Spins. And instead of Corn Pops, we'd have golden nuggets of corn at my house. Instead of Lucky Charms, we had Fortunate Marshmallows. You know what I'm talking about. Instead of Total, we had Almost. And I remember my mom and dad would come home, and we'd say, what is this? And they'd say, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And the problem with the imitation is that at first, it does taste like the same thing. It's usually not till the aftertaste that you realize you tasted the imitation. See, here's the lie of the imitation. The lie of the imitation says you can have all the taste for half the cost. And the problem with the imitation is that if you eat it long enough, you'll convince yourself it really is the same thing. And it's not till you go back to your buddy's house and they actually have Dr. Pepper and Rice Krispies, and you're like, oh my goodness, what have I been doing? See, what Moses' life calls for is the level of our life decisions is to say, don't settle for the imitation when God's offering you the real thing. Don't settle for a generic relationship with God where you come to church and maybe, do a couple Christian things, but be someone who dares to flip and dive. I'm wondering if today, in the level of your life decisions, there's not someone here who needs to say with Moses, I'm throwing down the imitation because I want to be someone who's going for the real thing. For the real thing. Every day in our life, we have this choice. We can go for what costs us less, what is temporary, what is easy, or we can choose that which will cost us more. Final thing, and then I'll be done this morning. Fourth thing here. By the way, the choose there is choose genuine. Choose the genuine over the generic. I'm tired of generic Christianity. It has no power. And I'm tired of the caricature of Christianity based on that generic version that I see all over our culture. And we can't change that caricature unless we have some people who are going for the genuine thing. I want to flip and dive. Last thing here is he was tempted to settle for the sample. Do you notice here, by faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king. He endured as seeing him who's invisible. In other words, he wasn't just sampling relationship with God. What started out in Exodus 3 is curiosity when he sees a bush that's burning and he wonders what is making this bush not burn up, and he hears from God. What starts as curiosity in Exodus chapter 3 becomes commitment in Exodus 33. Literally, in those 30 chapters, Moses has become someone who's tasted the real thing. He's met with God. The description of his life is this is a man who meets God face to face and talks to him as a man would talk with his friend. By Exodus 33, the people are in the middle of the wilderness. They want to kill Moses and go home. And God says to Moses, you got to get me out of here, because if I stay with this people, I'm supposed to be a blessing to my people, but I'm going to be a threat to my people. I'm going to kill them, Moses. So let me go on ahead, Moses, and you stay back. And Moses says this. He says, no. I don't want just your gifts, God. God's saying, I'll give you all the blessing. I'll give you all the gifts. I'll just remove my presence. And Moses saying, no. I've tasted the real thing. I don't want the sample size. I want to buy in bulk. You know what this feels like. You've been to Costco. I remember being at Costco some days when finances were a little tight. And we would just go there to sample some things, call it lunch, you know what I'm talking about? No intention to buy in bulk, just want a little sample. And Moses is saying, I can't settle for the sample anymore. I got to buy this thing in bulk because I've seen God face to face. I've had the genuine thing. And now anything other than the life of faith tastes like the imitation to me. I got to dare to flip and dive. There's going to be some moments where I smack. There's going to be some moments where the word concussion's not too far away. But I'm tired of doing pencils. I want at the level of my choices to dare to flip and dive, to dare to imagine, to dream with God. To hear the voice of God. Amen. And trust the heart of God. Amen. Enough to act on what I've heard. So we're back on the diving board this morning. And you got to choose. See, this choice for Moses, it's the exact same choice he gave to the people of Israel in his last speech before they would enter the promised land. Here's what he said in Deuteronomy chapter 30. He says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him. For he is your life and length of days, that you may dwell in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abram, to Isaac, and to Jacob to give them. Moses' words from Hebrews chapter 11 echo in the reality of the people that he was leading to the promised land. And his words echo today. There will be moments when you leap and you don't know what's going to happen. I'll never forget being in Israel just a few months ago, walking the streets of Jerusalem, and I got to overhear a chat between this Hebrew father and his child. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, it can be a kind of chaotic place, and things are going. This little boy had a tendency to get distracted to all kinds of things. And so literally, I'm sitting here watching this. This dad brings his son to him, and he says to his, looking at his son's eyes, he says, I am your Abba. When you see me doing something, I need you to trust me. And if you see me doing something that you don't understand, then ask me later, and I will tell you. And as I was watching that real conversation, it wasn't like a made-up sermon conversation. That was like a real conversation. What I sensed was God inviting me into that same kind of conversation. Dave, I'm going to tell you some things. And when you see me doing some things, you got to choose whether you're going to flip and dive or pencil. And there's going to be some moments where mid-air you feel a little out of control. But I'm your Abba, and I will be here with you. I will be here with you through every smack and through every flip and dive. But you, me, have to choose, because I'm back on the diving board, and I'm on the diving board every day at my work, at my home, and I got to choose. Am I going to flip and dive, or am I going to pencil? And God is calling us to meet him midair. This is faith at the level of your life choices. Let's pray. God, we are so thankful that the full testimony of Scripture is not just that we choose you, but you choose us. And that what we find midair is not just that we have chosen you, but that you have chosen us. So God, I pray today that you will not allow us to settle for a generic, easy, temporary, sample version called religion. But instead, you will move us from our religion and superstition into authentic faith. I pray not just for faith in this place, but faith beyond this place. What we really need, God, is not just to muster our faith in this room on Sunday, but to carry our faith with us on Monday through Friday. Maybe those of us in the room this week, they're going to be tempted to take the easy, cheap way out. Can be tempted to compromise on the altar of success and lose our significance. There will be those in the room that choose the harder way this week, that walk that path of crucifixion toward resurrection, and will have questions. There'll be those of us that will smack this week, trying to do what's right. But we trust, God, that as we make you our direction, that you will lead us to our destination. So we stumble toward you, God, with our choices today. We choose to live by faith. In your name, amen.